Dust drifted across the forward staging yard as Marines tightened straps, slammed tailgates, and checked weapons under the sharp Afghan sun. Engines rumbled one after another, forming a long line of armored vehicles waiting to roll out. Sergeant Lila Hart stepped through the noise with quiet footsteps, a slim figure carrying a battered rifle case that looked too heavy for her frame. A group of infantry corporals watched her pass, smirking before one of them said loud enough for half the yard to hear that she shouldn't be anywhere near the front, that the last thing the battalion needed was another liability slowing them down. A few laughed. One rolled his eyes. Another shook his head as if the sight of her was already a mistake. Lila didn't answer. She didn't glare. She simply paused, met their eyes with a steady, level look, and kept walking. Something in that silence made a senior Marine shift uncomfortably, but no one else noticed. The mockery continued, thin and careless, while she moved on without a word. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Sergeant Lila Hart had been with the battalion for just under 3 months, and in all that time most of the Marines still thought of her as the intel girl. On paper she was a field intelligence specialist, the kind of person who sifted through reports, watched drone feeds, and pushed sit-reps up the chain. Her name sat in the admin blocks next to acronyms and map grids, not in the roster of rifle squads or weapons teams. To most of them, she was the one who pointed at screens, not targets. In person, she did not look like anyone's idea of a sniper. Lila was small-framed, narrow-shouldered inside her plate carrier, her sleeves rolled neat and even. She wore her hair tight in regulation, no drama, no flair. She walked the way quiet people walk on bases all over the world, heads slightly down, eyes observant but never challenging. When she spoke in the command tent, her voice stayed low and even, more briefing room than battlefield. That was what the Marines saw. What they did not see was the file that had been burned and retyped 3 different times before it ever reached this battalion. Years ago, before anyone here knew her name, she had gone through reconnaissance selection and then straight into a marksmanship course most Marines had never even heard of. The school was buried in a corner of the training pipeline that people only mentioned with a shrug and a quick change of subject. The shooters it produced seldom stayed in one place for long, and their records rarely matched what was true. Lila had learned early that being underestimated was sometimes safer than being known. So here, in this dusty corner of eastern Afghanistan, she let the label, Intel Specialist, sit on her chest like just another patch. No one had ever seen her on a range long enough to guess what she really was. When weapon squads went to zero their optics, she always had somewhere else to be. When sniper sections headed to the high ground, she was usually in a tent with a laptop and a stack of imagery. Gunnery Sergeant Mark Rourke watched her with the kind of wary skepticism that came from too many deployments and too many promises that had not survived first contact. Rourke was built like the blast walls he leaned against, his forearms scarred from old burns, his jaw set in a permanent half-frown. He ran one of the line platoons and believed in things he could see, well-packed rucks, clean weapons, tight formations. A soft-spoken intel sergeant who never raised her voice did not fit anywhere on that list. "Field intel," he muttered once to Staff Sergeant Owen Drake as they watched her cross the yard with a stack of reports. "The field is where people shoot back." She does not look like she belongs in the first part of that sentence. Lieutenant Evan Brooks, the convoy officer, saw her differently. To him, she was a resource on a slide deck. Brooks was young for a lieutenant, sharp jaw, neat haircut, the kind of officer who could quote yesterday's brief verbatim. He trusted charts, ratios, and the latest update from higher headquarters. When Lila spoke in meetings, he listened politely, nodded at the right times, and then weighted whatever she said against the printed intel summary on his clipboard. "The route is clear," he told Rourke that morning, tapping the map with a pen. Hart's feed matches battalion's picture. Area has been quiet for weeks. Corporal Trent Barlow did not bother with maps or nuance. He was the kind of Marine who filled silence with noise, broad-shouldered with a grin that turned mean whenever he smelled easy prey. Lila's size, her calm, her job title, all of it was an invitation. He had already nicknamed her PowerPoint to his buddies, a joke that landed just hard enough to get a few laughs at the smoke pit. "Bet she has not even fired that rifle outside a quoll range," he said one night, watching her wipe down a battered case in the corner of the tent. "Probably just carries it so the photos look good." Drake heard that and did not laugh. Staff Sergeant Owen Drake had a different kind of gaze, one that slid past rank and bravado and settled on details. He noticed the way Lila's eyes tracked the horizon when mortars thumped in the distance, not flinching, just marking distance and direction. He noticed that when chaos hit the radio, she did not look to anyone else for cues. She already knew what it meant. He also noticed the way her right hand moved when she sat still. Whenever she was thinking hard, her fingers tapped a slow, precise rhythm on her thigh. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, 4, pause. To most people, it was a harmless fidget. To someone who had spent time around shooters, it looked very much like a counting pattern, the kind used to track breathing cycles and wind calls. Lila thought she was hiding it. She was wrong. Despite the doubts and the whispers, she moved through the days with a steady kindness that did not draw attention. Early one morning, as Marines lined up to check gear, she noticed a private in one of the rifle squads wrestling with his sling, the strap twisted and biting into the crook of his elbow. He was red-faced and frustrated, trying not to show it. "You are going to fight that thing the whole patrol," Lila said quietly, stepping closer. "Mind if I fix it?" He blinked, surprised, then nodded. Her hands moved quick and confident, unthreading the sling, flipping a buckle, relooping it so the weight sat across his chest instead of wrenching at his arm. She adjusted it, had him bring the rifle up, checked the tension, then smiled once. "Better," she said. "You do not want your rifle working against you before the enemy gets a turn." The private tested it, his shoulders easing. "Thanks, Sergeant," he said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "I did not know it could feel like that." "Most people do not," she replied. "You will pick it up." She moved on before anyone could turn it into a conversation. Later, on the way to the vehicles, she stopped in front of the small memorial wall set up near the edge of the camp. Laminated photos and dog tags hung there, dust settling on names and faces from previous rotations. Lila stood still, hands clasped behind her back, eyes tracing each picture. She did not rush. The yard buzzed behind her with movement and shouted orders, but she stayed in that quiet pocket for long seconds, lips pressed together. A young Marine passing by slowed when he saw her there. For a moment, he thought about walking up, saying something, maybe making a joke to cut the weight in the air. Instead, he just watched as she reached out, gently brushed a bit of sand off one photo, then stepped back and squared her shoulders. Her fingers found her thigh again. That same slow rhythm started up, almost imperceptible, as if she were counting something only she could see. Rourke caught a glimpse of that from across the yard. He watched her walk away from the wall, rifle case in hand, expression composed. He did not know her history. He did not know about the ranges and the quiet instructors and the impossible shots she had made years before any of them knew her name. All he knew was that something about the way she carried herself did not match the story everyone else had already written in their heads. He turned that thought over once, then pushed it aside. There was a convoy to run, a valley to cross, a mission on the board. Doubts were a luxury, and instincts had been wrong before. He told himself that the little intel sergeant would ride in the back, stay out of the way, and let real fighters handle whatever came. Only Drake kept watching her walk, eyes narrowed slightly. He saw the tapped rhythm, the unflinching calm, the way she scanned the ridgelines without seeming to. Something about it scratched at an old memory of training nights and whispered briefings. He could not place it yet, but he knew one thing with certainty. Lila Hart was not just what her file said she was. The convoy rolled out just after first light, the engines of dozens of maps and Humvees rumbling into a single, unified growl that echoed off the mountains. Dust lifted behind them in long, pale ribbons as 381 Marines pushed toward the valley that cut deep into the eastern Afghan range. The early sun cast sharp angles across the rock faces, turning the landscape into a maze of shadows and hiding places. To most of the Marines, it looked like every other route they had taken. But Gunnery Sergeant Mark Rourke felt the wrongness before they even reached the first bend. He stood in the lead vehicle, one gloved hand braced against the open hatch, eyes scanning the ridges like a man looking for a ghost he already believed was there. The cliffs on both sides rose too steep, too sudden. The switchbacks offered too little visibility. The riverbed below ran silent and still, not a ripple where there should have been wind. Every instinct Rourke had built over years in this country tugged at him with heavy insistence. "This is textbook kill zone terrain," he muttered, half to himself, half to the radio operator beside him. "Narrow road. High walls, no alternate routes. If I were planning an ambush, this is exactly where I'd set it." He keyed the radio. "Sir, recommend we stop and scan the ridges." "Something's off." In the second vehicle, Lieutenant Evan Brooks clicked his mic, sounding calm, confident, maybe even a little annoyed. "Negative, Gunny. Intel says it's cold. Route's been quiet for weeks. We need to make time before weather shifts." Rourke clenched his jaw. "Sir, with all due respect." "Gunny," Brooks cut in, voice clipped, "I said we push through." The radio went silent. The engines didn't. Rourke exhaled slowly, as if that breath alone could quiet his instincts. But the feeling didn't leave. Instead, it settled deeper, a warning pressing against the inside of his ribs. He lowered himself slightly in the hatch, eyes never stopping their sweep across the rock. In one of the central troop carriers, Lila Hart sat pressed against the metal wall, her helmet lightly brushing the window frame as she watched the terrain slide by. She didn't stare at the scenery. She tracked shapes, angles, shadows. The world outside the glass became a slow-motion study of things that didn't belong. A glint near the ridge. A patch of brush that didn't move with the breeze. A curve in the slope where rocks seemed too neat, too arranged. None of the movements were big enough to alarm the Marines around her. But to someone trained to notice the flicker of a scope lens or the unnatural stillness of a concealed position, each detail landed like a quiet alarm bell. The Marines in the carrier talked loudly at first, voices bouncing with the usual mix of boredom and nerves. Cards slapped against the metal floor. Someone joked about chow. Someone else complained about the heat building inside the vehicle. It was the normal symphony of a long ride into somewhere dangerous. But as the convoy pushed deeper into the valley, the mood shifted. The laughter thinned. Boots tapped less. Jokes drifted off without punchlines. A few Marines leaned closer to the windows, watching the cliffs with wary eyes. Corporal Trent Barlow sat across from Lila, leaning back with exaggerated relaxation, arms folded behind his head. He caught the way she kept scanning the ridges, the focused stillness of her posture, and smirked. "Don't worry, everyone," he said loudly, "just enough to get a few heads to turn. Hart will protect us with her weather reports." A couple of Marines chuckled. Someone elbowed the Marine beside him. But not everyone laughed this time. One private lifted his gaze from the floor and looked at Lila with something like guilt. Another Marine smile faded a little too fast. Even Barlow paused, studying their reactions before shrugging and leaning back again. Lila didn't react. She didn't glare or stiffen or look away. She simply turned her attention back to the outside world, her finger tapping that faint rhythm against her leg. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. A controlled tempo no one recognized but Staff Sergeant Owen Drake, who watched her from the far end of the bench. He didn't say anything. He simply noted it, filed it away, and shifted slightly in his seat. Drake wasn't the kind of Marine who believed in coincidences. He had seen that rhythm before. Once, years ago, during a training cycle where certain shooters had been taught to time their breathing to the movement of wind across a valley. Only a handful of Marines ever learned it. And none of them ended up sorting intel slides. He glanced out the window now, narrowing his eyes as the terrain funneled tighter around them. The ridgelines crept closer, the shadows longer, the road thinner. The valley seemed to swallow the convoy one bend at a time. "What would you have done?" the narrator might ask here. Would you have stayed quiet or stood up for her? In the troop carrier, no one stood up for her. No one directly challenged Barlow's dig. But silence carried a different tone now, less playful, more uneasy. The valley demanded attention, and every Marine felt it, even if they couldn't explain why. Up in the lead vehicle, Rourke's voice cut through the radio again, quieter this time. "Sir, visibility's dropping. Recommend at least slowing." "Gunny," Rourke said sharply, "we are not stopping. We have no confirmed threats in this sector." Rourke bit back a curse. Confirmed threats. As if the enemy politely submitted forms before firing. He scanned the ridges again, jaw tense. A shift of gravel caught his eye, just a flash far above them, where a narrow outcrop overlooked the road. It could have been an animal. Could have been Rotfall. But Rourke had been in country too long to trust. Could be. His gut never screamed this loud without cause. Back in Lila's carrier, the engine's rumble became a heartbeat, a steady pulse beneath her boots. She leaned slightly toward the window, trying to catch the same slope again. Something had moved up there, something small but intentional. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it. Brooks would not listen. He hadn't listened to Rourke, and he certainly wasn't going to halt the convoy because an intel sergeant felt something was off. But she kept scanning, tapping that rhythm, counting breaths and wind without even realizing she was slipping into old training. Another glint. Higher this time. Not sunlight off rock, too sharp, too controlled. Glass? Metal? The slope between vehicles tightened further as the convoy took the next bend. The road narrowed until there was barely room for the wheels on either side. Walls rose straight on both ends. The sky above became a thin strip of pale blue. The Marines felt it all at once. The hush. The choke. The sudden sense of being watched. Jokes evaporated entirely. Hands found weapons. Shoulders squared. The air tasted metallic, like the moment before a lightning strike. "Hey," a Marine whispered to no one in particular. "Why is it so damn quiet?" No one answered. Barlow shifted again, looking up at the ridgelines despite himself. He didn't mock Lila this time. He didn't say anything at all. The grin on his face faded the farther they rolled, replaced by a tightness around his mouth. Drake leaned forward slightly. "Gunny sees something," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "I feel it." Rourke keyed the radio one more time, voice low but urgent. "Sir, we need to reassess. This terrain is—" "We're committed," Brooks said. Push through. Committed. Exactly the wrong word. Exactly the word that meant turning back was no longer an option. In the troop carrier, Lila pressed her palm briefly against the window, narrowing her eyes. The high ridge to their left, 200 meters up, shifted again. A shadow moved where no wind touched. A cold certainty settled in her gut. This valley wasn't quiet. It was listening, waiting. And the convoy had just driven into its throat. No one inside the vehicle breathed for long seconds. Even the engine noise seemed duller, swallowed by the narrowing canyon walls. The convoy tightened. The valley narrowed, and every Marine felt that invisible line being crossed, the line where instinct whispers that something terrible is about to happen. Lila opened her rifle case slowly, quietly, unseen by most of the Marines around her. The latch clicked once. Outside, the first sharp echo cracked across the ridgeline. Not a rockfall. Not a bird. Metal striking metal. Something being lifted into place, and the valley's silence finally broke. The first crack across the ridgeline faded into the wind, too soft for most Marines to notice, but Lila Hart heard it with perfect clarity. She lifted her head just slightly, her eyes narrowing as she tracked the echo's direction. The convoy continued forward, engines still growling, but the pulse inside the troop carrier shifted. Marines glanced at one another, uneasy without knowing why. Lila reached toward the mounted radio near the front of the vehicle. The operator beside it raised an eyebrow as she adjusted the dial with two precise twists, tuning the frequency by sound alone. No hesitancy, no fumbling. Just a smooth correction that would have taken most Marines a minute or two of scanning. "You got experience with these?" the radio operator asked, surprised. Lila shook her head softly. "Just have it. But Drake, seated across from her, saw the truth in her hands. Recon-level familiarity. Something you only learned in units that required absolute communication discipline under fire. Not something they taught to intel techs who spent most of their careers indoors. Drake leaned back, studying her with a deeper frown now. Her shoulders were relaxed, breathing steady. Not a tremor in her fingers. She looked as if she were riding into a briefing, not a narrowing valley that felt more dangerous by the second. A light breeze pushed dust through the slatted windows. Lila closed her eyes for half a heartbeat, inhaled, and whispered under her breath, "Wind shift, north-northeast, 2 knots." The Marine next to her blinked. What was that? She didn't answer. She was listening. Feeling. Counting. Drake heard it too. Not the words, but the cadence. Wind calls. The kind snipers murmured unconsciously when evaluating terrain. He'd heard instructors mutter them during long-range qualification, felt the same controlled breathing in the presence of the best shooters he'd ever known. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. This wasn't the moment to ask. Another Marine, passing helmets down the line, bumped Lila's rifle case with his boot. The lid popped open a couple inches before she caught it with one hand. He froze, murmuring an apology, then stopped short when something inside the case caught his eye. A stitched patch, faded. Barely visible against the fabric. A single emblem, a griffin clutching crossed arrows, the old symbol of a sniper program that had been shut down years ago. "Where'd you get that?" he asked quietly. Lila shut the case fully and gave him a polite, empty smile. "Hand me down." But Marines didn't hand down patches like that. They were earned through blood, sweat, and more hours behind a rifle than most people spent sleeping in a year. The young Marine swallowed and passed the helmets down without another word. Drake's eyes sharpened. Something was wrong. Or rather, something was very, very right in a way no one else was seeing. All the little clues stacked in his head, lining up faster than he could unpack them. The first crack on the ridge. The shifting silence. Her calm, her breathing. Her hand on the radio. Her wind calls. That patch. Intel, Sergeant? No chance. As the convoy approached another tight bend, the walls seemed to rise even higher. Rourke radioed another warning. "Sir, we're losing sight lines. Request permission to halt and deploy scouts." Brooks answered with growing irritation. "Gunny, we are not stopping this convoy." "Intel confirms the route is cold." Lila finally spoke, her voice soft but firm as she leaned toward the carrier's open window. "Sir, recommend letting me move to an overwatch point on the ridge. I can get eyes beyond this choke." Brooks practically scoffed over the radio. "We don't need heroics from Intel." "Stay in the vehicle." Rourke muttered a curse under his breath. Drake closed his eyes, exhaling once as if Brooks had just sealed their fate. Inside the troop carrier, Lila didn't argue. She didn't explain. She didn't push. She just reached down, flipped her rifle case closed with deliberate care, and locked it with a single, quiet click. Expression unreadable. Breathing steady. Eyes focused, straight ahead. The Marines around her felt the shift, a tightening in the air, as if the vehicle itself sensed she was slipping into a different state of mind. One Marine swallowed hard. Another checked his safety twice. Even Barlow, who had mocked her for days, glanced at her hands and looked away quickly. Drake watched her with a slow, dawning realization. He didn't know her background, didn't know her record, but he knew shooters, and she wasn't acting like someone scared. She was acting like someone preparing, someone stepping mentally into a place where the world narrowed to angles, distances, breath cycles, and threats. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Sergeant, what exactly do you see out there?" Lila didn't answer immediately. She let her gaze drift back to the ridgeline, pupils narrowing as if tracing invisible shapes. Then she said quietly, "Patterns." Drake felt his stomach drop. Patterns meant people. Patterns meant intent. Patterns meant danger. Outside, the valley continued to constrict around the convoy, the air growing heavier and stiller. The ridges loomed closer, like jaws slowly closing. The Marines didn't know what was coming. But Lila did, and for the first time since the convoy rolled out, she rested her hand on the latch of her rifle case, not opening it yet, but ready. The click of that lock echoed louder in the silence than all the engines combined. The audience knows something is coming, and it's already too late to avoid it. The first explosion tore the morning open. A deafening blast slammed through the valley as an RPG streaked out from the left ridgeline and smashed into the third vehicle. Flames burst upward, twisting metal and throwing 2 Marines to the ground. The convoy lurched in panic. Engines roared. Doors flew open. Shouts filled the canyon as gunfire erupted from both sides, sharp, disciplined bursts raining down from high positions that no one had been able to see seconds earlier. The kill box had snapped shut. Bullets hammered the armored hulls of the vehicles, sparks leaping from steel as Marines scrambled for cover. Rourke's voice boomed over the radio, trying to establish control, but the valley drowned him out with the thunder of machine guns and the screaming hiss of ricochets. The road was too narrow to turn around, the front blocked by burning wreckage, the rear pinned by suppressive fire. They were trapped in the worst possible place with nowhere to run. Positions. Positions! Marines yelled, dropping to their knees and returning fire blindly toward the ridges. RPG left ridge. Move! Someone screamed as another plume of smoke streaked over the vehicles. Inside the troop carrier, Lila already knew this moment was coming. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for permission that was never going to arrive. While Marines were ducking and shouting commands, she reached for her rifle case, popped it open, and slung the long, worn weapon over her shoulder with a smoothness that looked nothing like panic. Then she moved. Before anyone even registered what she was doing, Lila yanked the back door open and leapt out into the open kill zone, sprinting toward the nearest slope as bullets stitched the dirt around her boots. Hart! Rourke's voice cracked over the radio, explosive with disbelief and fury. Hart! Get back here! That's an order! But she didn't stop. She didn't even look back. She ran straight into the fire. Drake saw her silhouette vanish behind a boulder and felt his pulse spike. The Marines around him stared in stunned confusion. No intel specialist would do something like that. No inexperienced shooter would sprint into bullets like they were rain. The way she moved, low, fast, minimal waste, was something he'd only seen in specialized teams. On the ridge, enemy fire intensified, trying to pin her, but Lila slid into a shallow fold in the ground just below a jagged outcrop. She flattened herself, exhaled once, and lifted her rifle with a calm steadiness that didn't match the chaos around her. Everything narrowed. The gunfire, the shouting, the smoke, all faded into background noise. Through her scope, the world became controllable. First target, RPG gunner on the left ridge, 200 meters, adjusting angle. Wind, 1 knot. Breathing, slow. Shot, 1. The man dropped before he could fire. Second target, a machine gunner repositioning behind a rock shelf. Angle shift, slight. Shot, 2. The gunner slumped onto the PKM, his spotter dragging him back in panic. Third target, another RPG carrier emerging from behind a tree cluster. Distance, long. Timing, critical. Shot, 3. Another body fell. The second launcher never ignited. Down in the valley, Marines saw the sudden break in fire from the left side and froze in disbelief. Someone was hitting threats faster than they could identify them. Marines called out, trying to find the source. Who the hell is taking those shots? That's not machine gun fire, that's precision. Where's it coming from? Where? Drake already knew. He climbed halfway out of his carrier door, scanning the slope until he spotted her, a small figure tucked tight against the earth, firing with a rhythm too disciplined to be chance. That's Hart, he whispered, jaw slack. She's the one doing this. The revelation stunned him more than the ambush itself. On the right ridge, enemy fighters spotted her muzzle flash and redirected fire toward her position. Dust exploded around her as bullets chewed into the rocks. She didn't move until she absolutely had to. When she did, it was with fluid efficiency, rolling behind another stone, recentering, reacquiring targets. Rourke yelled into the radio again, voice hoarse. "Hart!" "Fall back. You're going to get cut to pieces." She didn't answer. She was already tracking the next threat, a spotter relaying positions to a mortar team. Her shot hit the spotter mid-signal. The mortar round never left the tube. Down below, Corporal Barlow watched the right ridge go strangely quiet. It took him a full 3 seconds to understand what he was seeing. She's dropping them," he stammered. All of them. Marines around him looked up, stunned and speechless. Staff Sergeant Drake squinted through the dust, watching the impossible unfold. Her firing positions weren't random. Her target order wasn't guesswork. She was killing the exact threats that mattered most. RPGs, heavy weapons, spotters, fire controllers. She was cutting the spine out of the ambush one vertebra at a time. No intel sergeant should know how to do that. Another RPG team popped up on the far ridge. Lila rotated her rifle, calculated a longer angle, and fired. The man fell backwards, launcher spinning harmlessly into the dirt. More Marines began noticing. "Whoever that is, she's saving the whole damn convoy. Is that Hart?" "No way, that can't be her." "Barlow, didn't you say she couldn't shoot?" Barlow swallowed hard, throat dry. I didn't know." Respect crept into the voices that had mocked her. A realization spread slowly, naturally, as if each Marine felt it in their bones rather than their brains. This wasn't luck. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't an intel sergeant guessing. This was someone trained, someone experienced, someone who had done this before. The mystery only deepened the more precise her shots became. Lila fired again. Another enemy went down. And the Marines finally understood. The quiet woman they had mocked, doubted, ignored, was the only reason any of them were still alive. The valley wasn't won. Not yet. But the tide had shifted. And every Marine felt it. Drake wiped dust from his eyes and leaned out of the troop carrier just far enough to see the upper ridge. For a moment he thought the muzzle flashes were coming from scattered Marines trying to return fire from below. But then a shape shifted against the rock, small, steady, deliberate, and he saw her silhouette clearly for the first time. Lila Hart lay prone along the slope, body aligned perfectly behind her rifle, moving with a rhythm he had only ever seen once in his career. She wasn't firing wildly. She wasn't panicked. Every movement was timed, every shift in position matched the terrain, every shot landed milliseconds after her breathing cycle peaked. It was a pattern taught only in one place, a long discontinued recon sniper program whispered about in training circles but never acknowledged on paper. His blood ran still. He knew that pattern. He had seen it during a joint course years ago, watching shadowy candidates hit targets no human should hit. He froze, breath caught in his throat. "That's not an intel tech," he whispered, voice barely audible over the gunfire. "That's one of ours." The Marine beside him turned, confused. "What?" But Drake didn't repeat himself. He just stared at her, realization spreading through him like a slow burn. Down the line, word began to travel. Not shouted, not formal, but carried in the shifting expressions of Marines who saw what she was doing and couldn't reconcile it with who they thought she was. Each impossible shot silenced someone who had doubted her. Each fallen enemy team made one more Marine look up the ridge with something close to reverence. Rourke, catching glimpses between bursts of dust, finally lowered his binoculars and exhaled hard. The tightness in his jaw eased as truth settled in. He didn't know where she learned to shoot like that. He didn't know who trained her, who sent her, or why she'd been buried in an intel slot. But he knew exactly what she was now. A force multiplier. A guardian. A Marine you didn't question, you followed. Lieutenant Brooks ducked behind a wheel well as enemy rounds chewed into the road beside him. He raised his weapon to return fire, but paused when the ridge to his left went suddenly silent. Then the right side faltered too. He turned slowly, disbelief etched across his face. "What? How is she doing that? He murmured to no one. No one answered him. They didn't need to. More Marines looked up, watching the pattern unfold, her rolling left, shifting 3 inches to avoid being sighted, firing again with surgical precision. It was as if she were cutting threads out of a tangled web, pulling the entire ambush apart one shot at a time. The usual battlefield noise, shouting, metal clanging, orders being barked, thinned around them. Fear didn't vanish. Chaos still raged. But something deeper pushed through the noise. Recognition. The kind that didn't need a conversation to be understood. Barlow, who had mocked her that morning, lowered his rifle slowly, shame and awe mixing in his expression. A private beside him whispered, "She saved us from at least 3 RPG teams already." Brooks heard that. He looked up the ridge again, this time not with skepticism, but with an expression that belonged to someone realizing he owed his life to a person he'd barely acknowledged. Silence, real silence, grew in pockets across the line as Marines paused in cover, staring up at the lone figure dismantling the kill box they'd been trapped inside. Even under fire, the emotional weight settled over them. Lila wasn't who they thought. She was never who they thought. And now, in the middle of the most lethal moment of their deployment, the truth revealed itself without a single word spoken. Respect replaced doubt. Awe replaced dismissal. And every Marine understood someone extraordinary was fighting for them on that ridge. And she had been right there among them the whole time. Smoke drifted in thin, wavering sheets as the ambush finally began to fracture under Lila's relentless precision. Entire sectors of enemy fire had gone quiet. Marines were pushing vehicles forward, dragging wounded into the lead MRAP, engines screaming as they tried to punch a path out of the kill box. But the valley wasn't done with them yet. On the upper ridge, a jagged spine of rock nearly 400 meters away, a lone enemy fighter rose from behind a boulder. He moved fast, smoother than the others, lifting an RPG tube onto his shoulder with cold efficiency. The angle was perfect, the distance ideal. He had a clear line straight to the lead evacuation vehicle carrying 3 badly injured Marines. If he fired, they were gone. If he fired, the entire exit was blocked. If he fired, dozens more would die behind them. Rourke saw him first. His screen cracked through the radio. RPG, front ridge. Front ridge. Brooks swiveled desperately, but the shot was too far, too angled, too fast. Marines opened fire, rounds sparking harmlessly against the rock below the fighter as he adjusted his aim. They were out of time. Lila had already spotted him. She shifted her position, crawling 2 feet to her right to angle past a slab of stone that partly blocked her shot. The wind hit her face, a cross-current swirling between ridges, unpredictable and sharp. Mid-wind, mid-range, moving target, elevated angle. No sniper would take that shot under pressure. Certainly not with lives depending on it. But Lila wasn't thinking about difficulty. She wasn't thinking about odds. She was thinking about the 3 wounded Marines in that vehicle, men she had never met but whose families were waiting for them somewhere far away from this valley. She exhaled slowly, her pulse dropped. Her fingers tapped that familiar rhythm on her thigh. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. A counting pattern, older than instinct. The fighter shifted his stance, bracing. Lila's world narrowed to a single breath. She fired. The shot snapped across the valley like a whip. It hit the fighter cleanly, just as his finger tightened on the trigger. The RPG tube wobbled, slipped from his grasp, and clattered onto the rocks. Then his body crumpled backward, lifeless, rolling down the slope. The rocket never fired. The lead vehicle surged forward. The convoy finally broke free of the kill zone, rushing toward open terrain beyond the valley. For the first time since the ambush began, the Marines below exhaled, a collective breath they didn't realize they'd been holding. Brooks slumped behind his wheel well, staring at the ridge with disbelief. She saved the evacuation vehicle," he whispered. "She saved everyone." Rourke didn't answer. He was already moving, As soon as the return fire thinned, a small group of Marines scrambled up the slope to reach her. They fought their way through loose shale and dust, hands grabbing at roots and exposed rock. Drake led the climb, Rourke right behind him, each man fueled by urgency rather than orders. Lila remained in her final firing position, rifle lowered but still cradled with the same discipline as before. Her breathing was even, her expression unreadable. Only the tremor of dust on her sleeves showed how close the rounds had come. "Sergeant Hart," Drake called as he reached her, dropping to one knee beside her. "We're pulling back." "We need to move." She nodded once, calm as if she'd just stepped off a training range. Rourke reached her next. For a long second, he didn't speak, he just stared at her. The quiet woman he'd doubted, the intel specialist he'd written off, now revealed for what she truly was. He extended his hand. "On your feet, Marine." It wasn't barked. It wasn't ordered. It was respect. Plain, unadorned, undeniable. Lila took his hand, and he pulled her up gently, steadying her when her boots slipped on loose gravel. The two locked eyes for a moment, and Rourke gave a single nod, deeper and more meaningful than any apology. They guided her down the slope, as the remaining Marines watched her descent with something close to reverence. The whispers traveled through the ranks, not with shock now, but with awe. "That's Hart. She took out the RPG teams. She saved the convoy. She saved all of us." Brooks stood waiting at the bottom, his face pale, his hands still shaking. When Drake reached him, the lieutenant managed a thin, reverent whisper. "I didn't know she could do any of that. I didn't know who she really was." Drake turned his head slightly, voice low, the words carrying more weight than any rank could give. "Sir, you don't order someone like her." He looked directly into Brooks's eyes. "You follow her." Brooks dropped his gaze, humbled. Around them, Marines cleared the last of the kill zone, wounded being moved to safety, vehicles reforming the column. But something fundamental had shifted, something unspoken yet shared across every face present. No one mocked her now. No one doubted her. No one questioned her place. Respect settled over the formation like a quiet, steady wind. And in the middle of it stood Lila Hart, the same woman they'd overlooked that morning, now the single reason 381 Marines were alive to see another sunrise. The chaos of the ambush slowly faded into the steady rhythm of recovery. Medics knelt beside the wounded, wrapping bandages, checking pulses, loading Marines onto stretchers bound for the nearest aid station. Engines idled in low gear, their rumble softer now, less frantic. Smoke drifted upward in thin curls, dissolving into the Afghan sky. A short distance from the bustle, Lila Hart sat alone on a battered supply crate. Her rifle rested across her knees, dusty and scarred from the ridge. She didn't polish it, didn't break it down, didn't inspect the damage. She simply rested her hands on it, quiet and steady, her boots planted firmly in the dirt. The adrenaline had drained from her limbs, leaving a calm heaviness behind. Not fatigue, not relief, just the weight of what had happened. Marines moved past her in slow steps, not rushing, not distracted. They walked differently now. Each one glanced her way, their eyes holding something they hadn't carried that morning: gratitude, humility, a quiet understanding that went deeper than words. No one shouted her name. No one clapped her on the back. The respect they carried was softer, more reverent, born from knowing she had done something none of them could have. Corporal Trent Barlow hovered several feet away, hands awkward at his sides. The same Marine who had mocked her confidence, her job, her worth. Now he couldn't even meet her eyes at first. He shifted once, twice, then finally stepped forward. Lila looked up. For a moment he tried to speak, his mouth parting before closing again. No joke came. No excuse. No explanation. Only a single, heavy nod, small but honest, the truest apology a man like him could ever give. Lila returned the nod, nothing more. A few minutes later, Lieutenant Evan Brooks approached. His uniform was coated in dust, his face streaked with sweat and smoke. But the shaken look in his eyes wasn't from the firefight. It was from revelation. He stopped in front of her, took a breath that trembled slightly, and spoke with a sincerity he'd never used with her before. "You saved 381 Marines today," he said. "Including me." Lila didn't shift, didn't rise, didn't accept the praise. She simply looked at him with calm, unassuming eyes and replied in a quiet voice, "Just did what needed doing." Brooks swallowed and nodded, stepping back with the respect he had never afforded her until this moment. Around them, the battalion regrouped. Wounded were secured. Radios crackled with updates. The next phase of the mission was being rebuilt from the ashes of the ambush. But for a brief pocket of time, the noise softened, and the weight of what had happened settled gently over the valley. The narrator's voice would speak here, low and reflective. Real courage rarely shouts. It steps forward quietly when everyone else steps back. It shows itself not in bravado or noise, but in the moment a single Marine decides that fear will not decide who lives and who doesn't. And the moral, clear as the dust-filled light: honor isn't in the orders you follow, it's in the lives you refuse to abandon. Lila Hart, unnoticed hours before, now sat in the silence earned only by those who carry that kind of honor, steady, humble, and unbroken. Some heroes never ask to be seen. They move through the ranks quietly, unnoticed by most, carrying a strength no one recognizes until the world forces it into the light. Some walk alone so others can walk home. Some take the hardest steps, not because they want glory or recognition, but because someone has to, and they refuse to let anyone else pay the price. And sometimes, the smallest voice belongs to the strongest soldier on the field. A soldier who doesn't shout, doesn't boast, and doesn't need a title to do what's right. Lila Hart was one of those Marines. A reminder that courage isn't always loud, and heroism isn't always seen until the moment it saves us. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.